Some some have not been completed, but anyway, all these have submitted. Well, group 6, 7, and 9, there might be some issue there. So please discuss with your respective facilitators, and we'll see how we can overcome together. All right, so we wish everybody an enjoyable time and a productive time together with our consultant trainer, Dr. Diane Chamber. Dr. Diane Chamber, over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Fong. Good morning, everyone. I hope you've had a very productive week. Thank you so much to those who have completed the tasks. And I've had a quick look at some of them and I'm very impressed. So the depth of your understanding and also the keenness with which you've undertaken that task, you're to be congratulated on that. This morning, I'm going to just very quickly preempt before we start with Mr. Wilmot. And I want to say that this morning's particular presentation will look at inclusive OER and what that means, but it will also look at appropriate pedagogy. When we're looking at inclusive open education resources, there's a number of range of things that we need to consider, including universal design for learning, and that's why Bill Wilmot's coming in, and also assistive technologies. So I'll be talking to you about what assistive technologies are and how they work with inclusive open education resources. Before we start this morning, though, I just wanted to welcome everybody back and say Salamat datang ki sesa sesi kedua. Hopefully that's right. So welcome back to the second session. Sorry, I'll try. And the outcome for this particular session is to increase the knowledge of the considerations to be taken into account when we develop iOER. So as I said, we'll be looking at UDL, Universal Design for Learning. We'll be looking at assistive technology and we'll be looking at OER-enabled pedagogy. So there are particular types of pedagogies that fit well when we're using open education resources. Okay. So just to refresh, this is from last session that we had, open education resources, learning, teaching, research materials in any format and medium. So they could be video, it could be a written format, it could be a game, for example. All of those things can be open. They have to reside in the public domain, so they have to be publicly available. And they're copyrighted under an open license. So that license permits us to have no cost access, really critical when we're looking at people living in poverty, for example. It allows us to reuse, repurpose that information, adapt it and redistribute it. So open education resources are, as they say, open to everybody. When we look at accessible open education resources or inclusive open education resources, they allow people with disability or those who have barriers to learning to access that content regardless of any difficulties they might experience. And those difficulties could be geographic. They could be that the person has no money to go to study. It could be that they have a vision or a hearing impairment. The person might have a physical disability that impacts on them. So inclusive open education resources make sure that they are open and they are accessible for everybody to access. And that is the crux of the policy, the national policy that Malaysia has put together. So when we do look at open education resources, there's the 5 main areas that we look at. So this is the type of licensing. I'm not going to go into any depth on this because our fabulous colleague, Cable Green from Creative Commons, will be joining us on Monday. But I just wanted to touch base on these because you need to keep these in the back of your mind. So when we're developing OER, and inclusive OER in particular, you need to look at how that content can be used. So can we just reuse it as it is? Can we retain it? So use it, make it, archive it, keep it for myself. Can we revise it? So make it modifications or alterations to that content. Can we remix it? So maybe I put 2 different types of content together that might suit our purposes better. And can we redistribute it? So can I then share that content with other people in an open form? And the licenses that come along with that, usually Creative Commons licenses, will give us the indication of what we can do with the different types of resources. Okay. So I just wanted to touch base on the UNESCO recommendation on OER. And one of the things that really struck me at the beginning of this particular recommendation is that they talk about building inclusive and knowledgeable societies. Open education resources can support that quality education that is equitable, inclusive, open, and really importantly, participatory. So can other people participate in the construction of those particular knowledge bases as well? It also enhances the academic freedom and professional autonomy of teachers. So rather than reducing or stopping us from actually being creative, it lets us be more creative as teachers. And it widens the scope of materials that you might have available to you. We're not all experts in every little tiny thing, so it's very helpful sometimes to get some assistance from other people. When we look at the UNESCO recommendation 2019, it builds on a number of other recommendations that have come before it. So as you can see, this is not a new concept. This has been actually in progress for quite a long time. And the 2007 Cape Town Open Education Declaration was sort of the impetus for this to begin. Most recently, the 2017 Ljubljana, can't say it, OER action plan really talked about how do we put this in place and how do we make this happen. And then, of course, the 2019 is looking at enacting and making sure that we can put OERs in place and make sure they're available for everybody. It also, the recommendation also assists in achieving the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, in particular goal number 4, but a variety of other goals as well, including gender equity and ensuring that everybody gets an appropriate education. So there are 5 main objectives of the UNESCO recommendation on OER, and capacity of stakeholders is one of the first recommendations, and that's what we're enacting now. So we're building the capacity of everybody here to reuse, to access, to create, to redistribute OER. You will be doing every single one of those things. So it's quite exciting that we're actually meeting these objectives, first up. Developing supportive policy, Malaysia's already on top of that, so well done. Encouraging inclusive and equitable quality OER, and that's where we're talking about the inclusive aspect. Today in particular is where we're really going to be looking at assistive technologies and how they fit in with OER, and also universal design and how we can start thinking about designing our information up front with the needs of everybody in mind. With number 4, the creation of sustainable models for OER, I'm hoping that what we're doing here is a great model for other countries, for other people to see about how you can get movement going. And of course, facilitating international cooperation. So when you're working on OER, could you invite other people in from international contexts to do so? So there's such opportunity for collaboration, which is very exciting. And then, of course, I know this is the wrong cover, Dr. Fong, don't worry. So with the National Inclusive Open Education Resource Policy for Malaysia, the long-term vision was to ensure the adoption of inclusive open education resource by Malaysian higher ed institutions. So once again, we're clearly targeting that particular objective and vision here. Also, the policy was initiated to drive the agenda towards the Sustainable Development Goals, and states that an inclusive learning experience involves fitting content or making sure that content is adapted to suit everybody's needs and reduce barriers to learning. So the advantages of digital OER for learners with disabilities, it removes barriers, so it can make more flexible learning environments. And particularly if we're looking at distance learning or open learning, people can learn in their own environments. They don't have to travel into the city, or they don't have to move in order to access education. Educators can curate materials from a diverse range of people and include people's voice. So those with disabilities can be included in those activities. It allows you to adapt materials to be increasingly accessible, and we're going to talk about that on Monday. And an open license removes those costs for both the institution and the student. So there's a real cost saving here as well. And that's an important aspect when we're looking at making sure everybody can be included in education. And of course, it can be set out in file formats that work better with assistive technologies. And we're going to be talking about that shortly. So Bill, are you with us? Hopefully he is.
I just got on.
Oh, fabulous.
Good morning, Diane. Good morning, everyone.
Excellent timing. So everybody, I would like you to introduce you to Bill Wilmot. Bill is an implementation specialist. He is actually been working quite significantly with using the UDL framework as a tool for redesign of education. He's been a school leader and has worked in the area of math, science and music, and has a broad range and a passion and an understanding of universal design for learning. Bill, would you like to share a screen? Hello?
Yes, please, definitely. Sorry,
no,
trying to manage Zoom.
That's okay.
Hold on 1 second. Let me get myself organized.
There you go. Beautiful. And I should say Bill's coming to us from, is it Boston?
Yes, Boston area in the US, northeast of the US.
So we're being very international this morning. So there you go.
Very international, yes. It's 8:15 in the evening yesterday here. So
okay.
excited, so excited to be with you. And thank you, Diane, for introducing me. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to put a link to the slides in the chat because I have several links embedded in the slides, and that's probably the easiest way to access all of the links. So what I'm going to do this morning is just a very quick overview of universal design for learning, and then give some indications how this might help in thinking about OERs and thinking about the use of and the design of curriculum and instruction. So as Diane said, I'm a UDL implementation specialist at CAST. CAST is the originator of the Universal Design for Learning framework. We're a nonprofit that does professional development. We do research and design of tech tools, and we also publish and write about UDL. So happy to share any more about CAST. If you're interested in that, I'll share a couple of tools later, and a couple of those we've created at CAST. So the goals for this morning, for the next half hour or so, are to learn about the UDL core concepts. You know, what does this mean, universal design for learning? And to introduce the core tool of UDL, which are the UDL guidelines. And so if you know anything about UDL, you've probably seen these colorful UDL guidelines. I'll introduce those briefly. There's lots to explore in the UDL guidelines, so we'll just touch on the surface, really. So universal design for learning is an approach to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all by setting clear, rigorous goals, anticipating barriers, and proactively designing to minimize those barriers. So I figured I'd throw the definition out there right up front. Definitions are only so useful. You could spend 30 minutes or a week or a lifetime kind of unpacking and understanding what this definition really means. Essentially, UDL is a framework for looking at and understanding teaching and learning situations and designing them, redesigning them, designing them, taking the next step in the design to make them more accessible and to give greater ownership to students. So let's just talk about what that means, right? Really, UDL supports multiple pathways to the same goal. So being very clear about what your goal is, and we see that target on the screen where we're zooming in on a very clear goal that we want students to know, skills that we want them to develop, competencies that we want them to really live out. And then thinking about multiple pathways to get there. Realizing that there are going to be barriers that will stand in the way for learners, and thinking about how we design in from the beginning, proactively, flexibility into the learning experience and the learning environment. So there are multiple ways to get to any particular learning goal. So let's go a little bit deeper into some of the underlying core concepts that form the foundation of UDL. It really is built on a foundation of research in the neurosciences that is showing us again and again what a lot of teachers have always known, that all learners learn differently. And you walk into a classroom of 6-year-olds, of 25 6-year-olds, and you have 25 different learners. You walk into a university lecture hall of 70 different students, you have 70 different learners. So learning in a different way is not out of the ordinary. Learning variability, that's the norm. It's part of who we are as humans and how we learn, that no two of us are the same. So how do we understand that? How do we make sense of that great variability? How do we embrace the variability of the learners who are in front of us? Here's a cartoon of the one-size-fits-all store. Everything's on sale because nothing fits anyone, right? And we've got a snake, we've got a turtle, we've got a stork, and we've got an elephant standing outside the one-size-fits-all store wondering what is going to work for them. Variability is the norm. This is an image of the brain called from a project called the Connectome Project, which is an effort to visualize the complexity of the brain. And so we have this incredibly colorful interconnected strands of networks and connections in the brain. This is an effort to visualize that complexity of billions of neurons interconnected in billions upon billions of different ways, right? It would be shocking if all of our brains looked the same, right? Brains are as unique as fingerprints. So the brain that we bring to learning every day is both different for ourselves from one day to the next, and it's different between one student and the next. So variability is the norm. That's one of the kind of foundational concepts. Another is really, we think of it as a mindset shift, that the barrier is not in the environment, the barrier is in the environment, not the learner. It's almost a reframing of barriers and what they are and what gets in the way of learning. Often, I'll speak from a US context because that's the context I know. We default to a way of thinking that, well, there's something different about that learner that's getting in the way of them being able to learn. There's a barrier in that learner. And UDL is really calling us to reframe that and think about those learners vary, no question about that. But what is it about the learning environment? What is it about the goals, the tasks, the materials, the open educational resources that might be a barrier to learners? And how do we look at those resources to identify and minimize those barriers and to choose resources that have that already built in? So here's a visual of equality. Everybody gets the same thing. Everyone's standing on the same box to see over that fence to see the soccer game. We have one student who has no problem seeing over the fence to see the soccer game. Another one, they could use that box. They can, with it, they can see over the fence. And the third young person cannot see over the fence, even with a box. So everyone gets the same thing. It doesn't always work. A vision of equity, everyone gets the same, everyone gets what they need, right? So one person doesn't need a box. Another person needs only one box. A third person needs 2 boxes. I often wonder how that little guy got up on that box, on those 2 boxes. And somebody's gonna have to help him up there. UDL challenges us to think about the barrier in the learning environment, not the learner. So how do we redesign the learning environment to eliminate that barrier? Now everyone can see that football game, and we've taken away the fence that you can't see through. Everyone can see the fence, see through the fence, see the football game, and they have those boxes there if they need them, right? If they choose that that is a useful way for them to experience the game, maybe they'll sit down on a box, right? Maybe they'll stand on two boxes. Maybe they'll build a ladder for themselves so they can get up to that level of two boxes. So this shift in thinking, going from every learner has barriers that they have to overcome to every learning environment has barriers that can be minimized through thoughtful design. That's a big shift. And it doesn't happen all at once, right? I often come back to this graphic as a kind of touchstone for myself to think, all right, what do we really mean when we're talking about barriers? What are the barriers in this particular example? How could I minimize those? How could I make that fence so that you can see through it? Like I said, this I find myself revisiting this often, thinking about how do I think about minimizing barriers. There's another good cartoon that illustrates that. When a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. So on one side, we've got a wilting flower with the snowman there looking on in the snow. That flower is not going to bloom. In the other, we have a blooming flower in the sunshine. We change the environment to support the blooming of the flower. Sometimes I get the reaction on this one, well, what about the snowman when the sun is out? He's just going to melt. So there does have to be flexibility in the environment, right? It can't be the same for everyone. So you have to think about sometimes, how do I provide that flexibility in my learning environment? So now is the time often when, okay, so one, learner variability is the norm. We've got all of these different learners in our classrooms and across the world. It's even contextual. So from day to day, moment to moment, from subject to subject, it can change. And you're telling me also that the barrier is in the learning environment. So how could we possibly account for all of that variability? How could we possibly design to minimize all of those barriers? Well, there is some predictability to variability. And this tool that I mentioned, the UDL guidelines, part of what it does is summarize some of the variability in human learning. Right? It summarizes kind of the range of human variability so that we can design for variability. We in the US, a lot of teachers here have been taught this idea of designing for the middle of your classroom. So you design for the middle, and then you support students who might need more support, and you challenge students who might need more challenge. This is really challenging that idea to not design for an average, but to design for a range of learners, to think about what is the full range of learners and how do I design a flexible learning environment that can accommodate that full range of learners. So these UDL guidelines, they're a tool. So every tool has a function, has a purpose, has a way to use it. What do they do? I think of it as a kind of a multifunctional tool. One, it summarizes variability, right? So you'll see these three columns that provide multiple means of engagement, representation, action, and expression. Learners vary in how they engage with learning. They vary in how content is best represented to them, and they vary in how they best take action and express what they know. It's also just a summary of research. So each one of these individual checkpoints here, these individual bullets, is backed up by a load of research. And I'll share with you later on the interactive UDL guidelines, which give you kind of the documentation of a lot of that research if you're interested in that. They help us identify some of those barriers that might be embedded in learning environments. And then finally, they give us advice about what to do about it. How do we create supports and flexibility options and opportunities to create flexibility in design and support all learners. So those three columns are the three principles of UDL: multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. Representation here means how the content is being represented to learners, how they're perceiving and understanding content. Action and expression, how they're acting in the world, how they're expressing what they know. So one of the analogies that I like to use for the guidelines is that this does not replace all of the pedagogical tools and strategies that we've developed over our careers. I think of it as an organizer for our instructional tools, right? It's a way of taking all of those tools and ensuring that we know how to find them when we need them, right? We're intentional and purposeful in the way that we use the instructional strategies that we have. Is this a situation where there are going to be maybe heightened barriers to engagement, and I need to think about strategies related to sustaining effort, or related to recruiting interest or self-regulation? So it becomes the toolbox for us to organize our thinking. So two different versions of the guidelines linked here. I'll put one in the chat and just show you this, the interactive UDL guidelines. I highly recommend visiting the site. If you go up here, you have each one of these individual checkpoints is a hyperlink. So if we wanted to understand more about offering alternatives for auditory information, there's a whole page on why is that important, what are some examples of what offering alternatives for auditory information looks like, and then what's the research behind that particular checkpoint. You know, it's almost a table of contents of valuable research related to each of these areas, related to accessibility and greater student ownership. So experimental research, and then expert opinions and scholarly reviews. So lots to look at there. And then there's a one-page version of the UDL guidelines. I will put also in the chat, because I think I forgot to put it in the slide, the guidelines have been translated into several different languages. So there may be languages that would be helpful for you. I don't know. It has not been translated into Malay. I know that. I think that one way I think about approaching the guidelines, you know, kind of where to start with all of this, is there's a lot to look at. So just, you know, you can imagine a set of encyclopedias or a dictionary. You don't read that from A to Z and just absorb all of that information. You go to it with a problem. You go to it with a question that you're trying to solve. So something that's going on in your instructional practice that's not going just the way that you want. So we think of it often as thinking about a problem of practice that you want to explore using the UDL guidelines, using this framework to think about how you make the curriculum and instruction more accessible and promote student ownership. So I'm going to give just a couple of examples of specific technology tools, but this is not at all limited to technology, but I know that you're kind of going into this thinking about educational resources. So I'll share a couple of, you know, thinking about multiple means of engagement. These three guidelines, providing options for recruiting interest, sustaining effort and persistence, and self-regulation, place a heavy emphasis on being very clear about what the learning goals are and what the purpose of those are and what the relevance, how that connects with what we've studied before, where my learning is headed, and what the long-term purpose of me learning this is. So Goalbook app is a technology that really places the goals at the center of learning and allows both teachers and learners to kind of engage in setting and tracking goals over time. The emotional engagement in learning is incredibly important. The Mood Meter app is a is a phone app, but there are lots of versions of the mood meter for tracking emotional engagement. This was developed by the Yale University Center on Emotional Intelligence. So just it's a way of kind of categorizing mood and emotion and affect, and thinking about that and how that's important in a learning context. So multiple means of representation, multiple ways of sharing content, looks at providing options for perception, providing options for understanding language and symbols, and providing options for different ways to comprehend what you're learning, connecting it back to prior knowledge, and connecting it forward to where your studies are going. This Vocaroo is just a very simple online app where I can record anything and it will create an audio version of what I'm recording. And then it will give me a unique URL there that I can paste anywhere and create an audio file that's accessible to everyone. Very simple to use. A lot of things have audio recording increasingly built into them, so it may become obsolete at some point, but it's very easy to use. You can create a QR code from it too, and then embed that in things, download it, embed it. Clusive is one of the tools that I was saying that we have developed at CAST. It is really a reading environment. You can upload Word documents. Currently, it's just uses Word documents and another US-based program called Bookshare. You can upload a Word document. It could be your syllabus, could be an assignment. And when you upload it, it will, or the first time a student looks at it, it will ask them kind of the top 5 vocabulary words, and they have to assess themselves. I've never heard this, I've heard it before, I know it, or I use it. And then it'll keep a vocabulary bank for them of words that they know, that they're using, that they've heard of before. It helps them track vocabulary in that way. So all set with that. Now it's gonna, oh, one more. There we go. Now it's gonna open up the document for me. So every user can control the appearance of this document. So they have the ability to change the line spacing for themselves, to change the text spacing in any way that works for them, change the font. Incredibly important to make the document accessible for learners with vision issues. They can increase the font size. They can change the color schemes like this. They can look up words that are embedded in here. It reminds me that, oh, this is a word that I self-assessed on. Well, now I feel like that move was going to move to know it. Now I know that word. So many tools embedded in here to support the comprehension and reading of this document. We'll also, I probably don't have my sound on, but it will read aloud to you as well. So you have that option, and it uses all of the technology of the local device. So it integrates really well with local devices. Currently, I believe it only works in English, so that probably is limitedly helpful to everyone. But if you are doing any work in English, it works in that. And then finally, multiple means of action and expression, right? Multiple ways for learners to show what they know, to take action, to express and communicate, and to support executive functions. So Corgi is another tool that CAST developed. It is essentially digital graphic organizers that will kind of guide students through a process for creating a cause and effect argument, or documenting a cause and effect argument, or comparing and contrasting two events. So learners can enter content into this. It will read it back to them, and they can create extensions. It kind of guides them step by step through this process. They enter content over here. They can add pictures. And then at the end, it will actually, since I haven't added anything, it's not going to look that interesting. It will summarize everything for you. And then you can actually have it create a Google slide presentation for you. And so it spits out a kind of basic Google slide presentation that then you can dress up and make it look more professional. So, you know, if I had filled out all of those boxes, it would fill all of this out for me. So really supporting learners through a thinking process, right? And the reason to do that is to get higher quality thinking, right? The reason to make it more accessible in that way is to deepen the thinking that they're able to do. This I just discovered about a month ago. EasySkillTree.com is another way. Skill trees are a way of documenting. I'm not logged in, so I'm not going to be able to show you the example that I have. Maybe it'll quickly log me in. A way of documenting skills and how they're interdependent. So here's one that I built on multiplying single-digit numbers. I work with a lot of teachers of younger kids. So this is, you know, in order to get to multiplying single-digit numbers using an array, that was the skill that I chose, I have to have a fluency in addition facts. I have to know that multiplication problems can be represented as arrays. I have to understand that repeated addition is the same as multiplication. So it's a way of tracking all of these skills. And then I, as the student, can check those off and say, okay, well, I've accomplished that one. And then you can combine these into larger skill trees as a way of kind of keeping progress, keeping track of your progress over time. One other resource to just share is this technology and curriculum review guide that we've developed. So this is worth, as you're looking at resources, worth looking at. I'll put the link in the chat, just to consider kind of the basic accessibility, to consider the flexibility of the tool, how well does it support learners throughout the process of learning, and how well does it support what we call expert learning. This is one of the mantras of the universal design movement in architecture. What's necessary for some is good for all. Where I live in Boston, it's cold right now, and it snows a lot. So it just snowed yesterday. So this is a typical scene from a school where the gentleman in the wheelchair pulls up and said, "Can you please shovel the ramp?" And the gentleman shoveling says, "All these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you. But if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in." If you shovel the ramp, we can all get in, right? If we create an accessible pathway, then everyone is able to access. And we do that by creating flexibility in our curriculum and in our tools and making that available to everyone. So this concept of expert learning, you'll see down at the bottom of the guidelines, this is the goal of UDL. And the document is linked here on this slide. And if I forgot to link it, I'll make sure. Oh, it is linked in the speaker notes. The way that UDL leads to this idea of developing greater expertise at learning, kind of the theory of change behind that, is that we want learners to set goals. We want them to make decisions about how to get there. We want them to monitor their own progress toward that goal. Am I getting closer to that goal or not? We want them to reflect on the process of learning. What went well, what didn't go well, what would I do differently next time, and set a new goal for themselves, right? If we were, if everyone was a perfect expert learner, they would go through this process and we as educators could just step back. They wouldn't need us, but that's not the reality that we live in. So we have a role in this. As designers, we're creating opportunities for expert learning. So as a designer, we're articulating clear and relevant goals. We're finding ways to make those goals relevant so that they can embrace that goal, to set that goal for themselves. We as designers are outlining multiple learning pathways so that they can make decisions about how to get there. As designers, we're supporting learners to monitor their progress, to know what success looks like, to understand all of the criteria of what successful learning looks like. And then as designers, we're creating opportunities to give feedback and support the reflection process so that they can take on more ownership and drive more their own learning. And then we're creating opportunities for them to set and adopt new goals. So this is kind of the ultimate goal of universal design for learning, is really to increase the learning expertise of learners by giving them access and by inviting greater ownership and control of their own learning. I'm going to stop talking there and just invite questions and reflections, discussion, connections to your own work.
Thank you so much, Bill. I also want to say that we've got 11 facilitators who are currently working in the area of UDL, and I'm sure they've got some questions or comments for you.
Wonderful. I'm going to turn off the sharing so I can see your faces. Please feel free to put things in the chat or unmute.
So Dr. Chong has his hand up. Dr. Chong.
Hi, thanks, Dr. Diane, and hi, Bill. Okay, our team has been applying UDL in our teaching and learning activities, so it's very, very useful. Yeah, when we try to use UDL as a guideline, we can start to see all the benefits from it. But when we would like to introduce to our colleagues and we tell them what is this UDL, the framework, and so on, they will feel overwhelmed. They say, oh, okay, this very sophisticated and complicated. So that is the major issue we face when we introduce the UDL to the other educators. Do you experience that?
Always. So that is, you're in very good company. I haven't met anyone yet who has not felt overwhelmed by it. So that's very common. One thing, this is why I'm going to share my screen briefly again. This is why I like this analogy of what is a problem that you are seeing in your teaching and learning that's just bothering you, right? Something that's not going the way that you hope to. And thinking about just one new change that you could make to think about using the guidelines. Because it is overwhelming, right? You know, these set of 31 checkpoints are not meant to be a checklist, right? It's not meant to check off every single one of those and say, okay, now I have the perfect course, right? I've checked off every checkpoint. It's really to think about for any particular situation, any problem that you're facing, any challenge, right? And that could come in the form of, I always have a group of students every year who don't understand this concept or who struggle with this skill. Well, that's an indication right there that there's some barrier there, right? And how could I get after understanding that barrier? And that's exactly what the guidelines are about. So I really encourage people to think about it as making one change at a time, right? To just identify one barrier and one new option, one new bit of flexibility, one new support that they want to provide, because then it will, as you said, then you'll start to see the impact of that over time. Yeah, and the benefit. And so, because people have to see that for themselves in order to really go as deep as you've already gone to understand about what applying it is. and what that really means.
Yeah, I do the same sort of thing, Dr. Chong. I have a second-year secondary pre-service teachers. They have to design a unit of work using UDL principles, but we start off with one lesson, and we start off just looking at engagement, and then the next week we look at representation on the same lesson, and so we do it very gradually, and eventually we scaffold, and we support, and we share, and we collaborate, and eventually, gradually, they get to have an understanding of what's required.
That is one thing that you said, Dr. Chambers, is really important, just slowing down the process, because, you know, working with educators, educators at any level really, are moving at a very fast pace to walk in the next day and support learning. So getting them to slow down and think very intentionally about every stage of design is really important.
And it is very much that mind shift change. So it's going from, I need to plan my lesson and then cater for these different areas, to I need to plan my lesson so that everybody can actually access that lesson from the start. Very different mindset. So I have one question in the chat box.
Yes, I see.
Yeah. So how does collaborative work fit into this? As far as what I understood, UDL tries to make it available to all types of learners. What is the main barrier to be solved? Collaboration amongst learners is an important matter as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we didn't get deeply into this, but thinking very carefully about what the goals are of any learning situation, and sometimes goals around collaboration, deep discussion, that is the goal of the learning, right? Learning how to engage in academic discourse at a higher level, and so really it's about, I like the word that Dr. Chong used, which was applying UDL or using UDL, right? Thinking about how do we use these guidelines to pursue whatever goal we have. And so sometimes the goal is collaboration and having students engage in deeper discourse. So even something as simple as feel free to unmute your mic and ask a question or put it in the chat, right, is a way of offering an option, two different ways to get to the same goal of collaboration and discussion that is going to minimize barriers for some people. So that's a simple example. I'll say this, that the framework of UDL is very focused on individual learning. And so in a lot of ways, I don't think it highlights collaboration enough. The way that it is highlighted the most is around engagement, because collaboration can be a very strong engagement tool, right? That ability to discuss ideas with others and talk them out, to discuss them with your professor, your instructor, is an important engagement tool. But it's also, not everybody's the same that way, right? Some would rather discuss via a written form or discuss silently. We as has everyone over the last 2 years, done a lot more teaching via Zoom. And we've used a lot of collaborative documents to have people discuss silently in a document that's shared between everyone, because Zoom creates a very different dynamic, right? You're even more standing up in front of the entire room and speaking to everyone when you unmute and talk on Zoom.
Thank you. It looks like Dr. Chong's going to dominate. He has another question, please, Dr. Chong.
No, it's not a question, but pertaining to collaborations actually our teams also have experience on collaborative assignment, but UDL come very handful and useful as in when we providing options, like we set a goal, what they have to learning goal for them, and then we list out available options for communications, how they can accomplish the task. Okay, we can like translate the goals, the assignment into many forms. So the collaborations will be chemistries between the group members. They look at the available options provided by the educators, and they will choose the one that best for them among their group members. That is how we apply UDL in collaborative assignment and works.
Fabulous.
Thanks.
Hello.
Hang on, we just have a hand up from Zulkarnain, and I'll come back to you, Munira.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Diane. And so, okay, thank you, Bill, for the sharing. Okay, I just would like to get some perhaps perspective from you. Simyosen has been doing, deals a lot with teaching, giving training for our teachers, and we do also have parents and even the learners themselves attending trainings and events. And we don't have a specific trainers. We look and find the best person for every training that we conducted. So in our training, we want everyone to be able to access the materials. Based on many various disabilities, the visual impairment, hearing impairment, and in every time we do need to emphasize to the trainers that you need to prepare all these materials as the best you can. So perhaps based on your experience in dealing with, because we meet new people most of the time, we very rarely repeat the same trainer. So we need to have perhaps, do you have some suggestion of templates that we could guide them quickly? Because we understand that they need to prepare the materials, and they perhaps don't want to spend too much time in addressing to this UDL material. So what do you think on that?
We have the same problem all the time when we host and sponsor conferences. So what we've done is come up with some very specific guidelines for people, kind of what we expect from the materials that they prepare, things like videos having captions, photographs having alt text. And so a lot of some of the basic accessibility features. But some of that
we will actually be going through that next week in some depth. Wonderful. And we will have some accessibility guidelines for you.
Some of that requires some education, though, for trainers coming in who may or may not know some of those things. So I think that making sure that, so obviously learning all of those accessibility guidelines yourself, and then finding ways to share that with trainers that are coming in. To me, the minimum, and actually that document that I linked around looking at technology and curriculum links to some of the accessibility tools that we have at CAST, which may or may not be relevant in your context. But people have to be able to perceive the content, right? So if they can't see, how do they hear it? If they can't hear, how do they see it? And they have to be able to navigate the content. So these kind of top two boxes on the UDL guidelines are the ones to pay attention to: perception and physical action. And then also just the kind of emotional and affective access of being clear about what your goals are, right? And being clear with what you want people to take away from the training. And so, being on the receiving end of being the trainer that walks into places often, I'm always happy when people ask, what are people going to walk away with after this training? So that's the question that I would be asking trainers. What are they going to know and be able to do at the end of this training? And you'll get a sense very quickly of how well defined they have that in their minds.
Thank you very much. Munira, you had a question.
Okay, thank you, Diane. First and foremost, I'm Munira, member of Group 8 under Dr. Chong from UMP, and currently in charge for Disability Unit, University Malaysia, Pahang. So I am very much appreciate this session since we really can share and also contribute. And I have 3 points. It's also in terms of sharing plus questions. So first of all, about the feedback from the task given by Diane, we discover some important aspect other than the hardware perspective and also software. There is also alarming issues on the psychosocial support. Meaning the student, in order for us to have the inclusive perspective, they also missing the human touch, because we can say that we are now in the something that they really have difficulties, for example, to meet the exercise and cost assessment. For example, when they want to ask, because we have both, like synchronous and asynchronous. So sometimes they feel so challenging to discuss with the peers. And also, they also like the normal situation, they can just, for example, probably ask their seniors or perhaps their mentors. But in this sense, they do feel that they need this kind of support that we can say that as a psychosocial. So perhaps we can also close the gap between how they can engage more with the instructors, for example, the teachers, educators, and lecturers, and also their peers and also seniors. So this is something really interesting about the task, because previously we are more concerned on the internet speed and also the laptop, which is not really conducive and so on. But we miss one important part, which is the missing the huge part to build their characters. So perhaps we can together solve or collaborate more on the psychosocial part. So the second part, which is already covered on the engagement, is the perspective of educational 4.0 and society 5.0, which is we try to solve the community problem. So they do feel that I try to share, because we do have meetings yesterday with the disability community in University Malaysia, Pahang, and they do feel and they want to express that rather than be the receiver of the knowledge, they are also enthusiasts to contribute, to be part of the knowledge creator. For example, we have like 7 types of disability, right? So we are easily can address for the blind, for the impair of hearing and so on. But how about the sometimes with emotional or mental disorders, because they are so we can say not so stable, and at the same time, interestingly also from the task one, they want to share that they're also having this kind of sort of health problems or health issues, either from the disability or the student without a disability, long exposure to the screen. Meaning not everyone is comfortable to that, and not everyone also know that, actually I'm not so comfortable, and even my eyes also having problems. So this is something that perhaps we can look upon. And last but not least, talking about the UNESCO recommendation on OER, we in UMP looking forward for our friends here to help us to further improve on encouraging inclusive and equitable quality OER. For at the moment, we have the baby step of having the ecosystem, because interestingly, Bill Wilmot did mention about is the environment, not the people itself. So we try to create an ecosystem that try to deliver all the aspiration of ODL. So looking forward to collaborate, and we just share our, and to Dr. Chong, sorry, because we took some time to convert to PowerPoint slide to make it accessible to everyone. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Munira. Very appreciative. And yes, definitely that environment's going to be some impact. Now, I have one last question, Bill. I hope you've got time. I've got it from, is it Doria from UTHM? In personalised learning, is it possible for you to share tips and tricks in UDL to boost students' learning motivation in asynchronous teaching and learning mode?
As you can guess, I wrestled with this question a lot in the last 2 years. And from 5-year-olds to university. And I think some of the answer points back to what Munira was just saying, that the learning environment and the teaching phase, right? The relationship that you have to be, both be welcoming, have to both be inclusive, right? So how do we leverage a valuable relationship to support deeper learning? And how do we, how is that represented in the learning environment? So that, as one of my colleagues says, everyone walks into the learning space and has the experience, they knew I was coming. They knew I was coming, they built this for me. So a lot of it is, so to the asynchronous question in particular, I think presence, having a face of an instructor in the digital learning environment is really important. Video does that really well. Pictures do that really well. Even if something doesn't have to be video, making a video about it anyway, right? Presenting exactly the same content in a written form and in a video form just personalizes it and allows people to see that you're a real person on the other side of the learning management system, right? Or on the other side of the computer, who really is interested in their learning. I think another one that is really important and impacts engagement and a lot is feedback. So finding ways to give feedback from the instructors and peer feedback, peer-to-peer feedback on a regular basis is really important. Otherwise, it can feel like you're sending your work from the student's perspective, sending your work out into the digital world, and it's not clear what if anything is coming of that. And of course, so many of the things that apply in an in-person world apply in asynchronous world. So clarity of goals, relevance, authentic tasks, writing something that has a real audience, right? So as much as possible, creating an authentic and genuine audience for for the work and thinking that students are doing.
Thank you. Bill, I have another couple of questions. Have you got time, or
Please,
do you need to rush off?
Please,
okay, fantastic. I'm just
going to go to bed after this.
Oh,
so.
good. Well, I'm just going to go to the chat. Professor Fong asked, for effective implementation of UDL, is it top-down or bottom-up approach?
I'm going to say both.
Bill, can I just add something here? Okay, my name is Fong. Okay, thank you for the very enlightening sharing to every one of us. We are very inspired by your sharing. Now, in Malaysia, the Ministry of Higher Education, through the other ministries, have committed to want to implement this matter of inclusiveness of OER. So we have got the policy now, and the policy not only is endorsed by the ministries, but also gazetted by the government just 2 months ago. Okay, so there is a commitment. Now the question is, from your experience of implementation, what would be more effective, strategically speaking, top down or bottom up, from your experience? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's a hard one, and it's great that there's the commitment from the top. It sounds like exists. So I think start where there's commitment. We talk about in implementing UDL, kind of at any level, a simultaneous top-down and bottom-up. So what are the systems and structures that can be implemented from the top down? And how do we create, we talked about that mindset shift, right? That's an individual process that individual people go through. And of course, that can be facilitated by systems or interfered with by systems. But this idea of going from barriers are in learners to barriers are in the learning environment and in the tools and in the resources that we're using. That's a big shift to make. So I guess my answer, and maybe this is not very satisfying, is both. And usually the way that we do it is find small groups of people at specific institutions who are interested in learning more about and implementing UDL into their practice, to really create a kind of pilot program, an initial program in specific institutions, and then have it grow from there. And then have it simultaneously come from the top down, which in your case sounds like it's about identifying OERs that are going to be align with UDL, that are going to implement these practices effectively. And so that's going to support it kind of in both directions.
Thank you. Zoraida, you've got a question?
Yes, please. Thank you, Diane. Hi, Abil. I've got a question regarding to how we can effectively apply UDL in terms of designing assessment, because we have to attain a certain taxonomy levels, right? And I'm teaching courses in engineering and science. And what happened is that I usually figure out students who are very active in class, asking good questions, but somehow, unfortunately, performing quite poor in exam, especially in written exams. So how are we going to, have a multiple representations or kind of assessment, but still we could attain a fair taxonomy level in terms of cognitive? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Also, a question that I get a lot with whenever there's standardized assessments involved. So I often think of this as dissecting the skills that are necessary to do well on that exam at the end. And I think that often people will fall into the, or in the context that I've worked in most, fall into the trap of thinking that the assessments that we do along the way have to look like that final exam, right? When in reality, we could take that, all of the skills and content knowledge that are required for that final exam and provide, very flexible kinds of assessment along the way to really build and deepen that skill, the skills and the knowledge base that are necessary for the exam, so that they can then put that all together when they get to the exam. Now, the first time that they see questions like they're going to confront on the exam shouldn't be on the exam. They'll need to practice those along the way. But having flexible assessment throughout helps them with that process of developing as expert learners, to really understand, for them to understand for themselves what is the best way to express what I know, and then how am I going to learn how to scaffold that for myself when it comes time for the exam. So the fact that you are maybe providing scaffolds for the interim exams allows them the opportunity, especially if you require this, to reflect on, how did I use that scaffold? Did it help me, right? When I had the opportunity to present it either in slides or in a written form or on a video, how did those different formats help me kind of consolidate my understanding? I used those digital graphic organizers. How did that help me? And how would I use a version of that when I have to take that exam? So that process of becoming more expert at learning, that phrase expert learning, at least in an English context, the word expert often has the connotation that I have arrived, I am done, I am an expert at learning. That's not how we see it at all. We see it as an ongoing process. So that should be happening when you're 5 years old. That should be happening when you're a university student or when you're a university professor or instructor, right? We're always becoming more expert at learning. So that's the, I think that process of becoming more expert allows those students who are engaged and speaking in class and have a good grasp of material to then translate that, have a greater likelihood of translating that into a result on an exam.
Fabulous, thank you. Dr. Zulisman had a question for you.
Hi, thank you very much, Dr. Deanne. Now, you know, all this conversation just now we are talking about the user's point of view, but you know, I would like to ask Dr. Bill regarding about we ourselves as an academician this time, right? Now, for the past 2 years, you know, coming to 3 years, actually, we're having all these pandemic issues and all the classes being conducted through online. I'm having, you know, not even this inclusive or UDL issues we call it, but even a basic simple of instructional design or learning design issues is actually, that's actually is a big issues for me now. So, you know, I would like to have some tips from you, you know, how actually successfully you implementing this, because of I'm having a difficulties in convincing even a very basic learning design for the normal students, you know, from my all these so-called almost 800 lecturers, you know, to have a proper learning design, you know, through online learning. And now, you know, if I'm talking about the inclusive, I think, you know, they're going to burst out later. So, you know, share with me, you know, because I really, you know, I'm really having a difficulties. I think, you know, all this while, actually, we are trying to address our users, but we never address ourselves, you know, as an academicians, how actually we preparing ourselves in terms of, you know, designing this UDL, you know, because of even a simple basic instructional design also actually they, you know, they don't have that kind of know.
Yeah. It's that's an ongoing process, right? And as someone noted earlier, it can be an overwhelming process. I had a useful place to start is thinking about feedback from students. That can give you a lot of very good information about where potential barriers might lie. And a teacher said to me the other day, who's an incredibly reflective educator and actively seeks out feedback from his students, said the other day to me, you know, sometimes it's difficult to listen to that feedback because you're overwhelmed and it's just not what you can hear right now, right? So you have to do it in the right way and at the right moment for yourself. We use something called a stoplight reflection. We use it often. I'm saying this realizing that I'm talking about stoplights in the US. I don't know what traffic signals look like in anywhere, but red, yellow, green. Red, what barriers did you confront in your learning? Yellow, what questions do you still have? And green, what are you excited about? So that creates the opportunity for me to learn a lot about how this particular week of learning went down, right? If we ask that at the end of the week. And then it tells me what to focus on next week, right? What questions do you still have? Gives me a starting point for learning tomorrow. And
we use something similar called 2 stars and a wish.
I love it.
So what are 2 things that you learned that you will take away, and what's something you wish to consider? So we use similar sorts of techniques. Yeah.
And they're wonderful because they're useful reflection tools for the learner, and they're useful for us as designers. So I don't know how useful that was, Dr. Zulisman, but it's an ongoing process. So you know, we can't do it overnight. And I think the most important part of implementing something like this is really the collaboration between colleagues to understand how is that playing out for my colleagues. What have they tried out? What results have they seen? What would that look like in my context, in my discipline, and thinking about how to implement that.
Fantastic. And Dr. Zulisman, I'd also recommend having a bit of a toolbox of things that people can try in regards to collaboration within that online environment. My university went from completely face-to-face, no online at all, to completely online within 1 week. And we did that by sharing, but also having access to some ideas from a variety of people as well. So that collaboration, as Bill said, is important. We might stop there. You're welcome. We might stop there and thank Bill very much. So can I have a round of applause for Bill? Excellent.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me, Diane. It was wonderful to meet you, if only briefly, and I wish you all luck with your work.
Thank you so much. And thank you for taking time in your evening to, oh, a photo. We have to get a photo. Hang on. Absolutely. You have to stay there for a minute. Can everybody put their camera on, please? Hang on, let me just get rid of that text box. All right, screen one. Let me just put them in. Hang on a second. Sorry, bear with me. So that was screen one. Screen two, everybody's smiling. Gorgeous. We put that one on. And screen three. So many people. Okay, screen three, everybody's smiling. Cameras on. Okay, just a few more people. Excellent. Let me get that one. And last but not least, screen four. Okay, so cameras on, everybody. There we go. So thank you very much, Bill. We very much appreciate it. Now you're free to go to bed.
Thank you all. It was wonderful to meet you, and have a lovely day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bill. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bill.
Wonderful sharing.
Thank you. Okay, I think we might need to set a little break. So we might take a 5-minute break and just go and get a drink, maybe go to the restroom, and we'll be back here at 25 past. Okay, thanks everyone. Just give people a couple of minutes to come back to us. So I'm going to build on what Bill was talking about and look at some of the assistive technologies and the digital tools that you can use to help you make your inclusive OER. And we need to be cognizant of the assistive technologies that people are using to make sure that our open education resources can be accessed effectively by them. So there's a wide range of different assistive technologies. Excuse me, when we look at assistive technology, it's really any item, piece of equipment or product system, whether it's acquired commercially, off the shelf, modified or customized, something that you can improve the functional capabilities. So what we're looking at is the function of the person and how we can make sure that they can actually access that function. Digital tools, and these also come in really importantly when we're looking at both universal design for learning and inclusive open ed resources, include things like programs, websites, or online resources, and Bill showed you a few of those that make the tasks easier to complete, but for some people make them possible. If you've got a physical disability, for example, you may not be able to type. So some of the software or the online tools might make it possible for you to actually speak an assignment, so you don't have to actually type it. So assistive technology really focuses on strengths and it increases the independence of the student. This is really critical if we're working with students who may have particular disabilities within our settings, to make sure that they can do so and complete their work without having somebody else come in and help them. It allows them to complete things they might not otherwise be able to do and really enriches those educational outcomes. So assistive technology is a really important component when we're looking at inclusive open ed resources. There's sort of three main types, and when we're looking at open educational resources, sometimes you'll find that, and I know from my work in the Philippines, that sometimes they print out the resources, they're not necessarily online. And in that case, there are some tools, particularly low-tech assistive technology that can support students. Low tech really are usually devices that are not electronic, that usually don't take much training, that are pretty cost effective. So in some low income environments, for example, we might use a lot of low tech tools. Medium tech are things that are reasonably complicated, and they can be things like digital voice recorders or visual timers. Wheelchairs that are manual wheelchairs are considered medium tech. They might require a little tiny bit of training, but generally not, and they are often electronic. High-tech assistive technology are often more complex and specialised to a particular function. So if I'm looking at a voice output device, for example, that's to address the needs of somebody who can't speak. So very specific function. Include things like prosthetic limbs, electronic page turners, computer hardware and software. When we're looking at low-tech devices in the classroom, for example, at a university level, it might be things like magnifiers, and there's a huge variety of different magnifiers you can get hold of. It could be slant boards, and slant boards are boards that are slanted and they reduce fatigue for somebody who has to handwrite. It could be self-opening scissors, it could be book holders for somebody who have low muscle tone. It could be pencil grips to help somebody write effectively. When we're looking at mid-tech, you've got things like smart pens, particularly if I've got students with learning disabilities and dyslexia. Smart pens are really becoming much more highly used. And they're basically a handheld scanner. They'll scan the text, they'll read it out for the person, and they will actually store pages and pages. Now, the new scanners are really fantastic. You can also get things like reading pens, online graphic organisers, and I know Bill's already touched on that, so I find them particularly useful. Inbuilt support, the accessibility support that already exists on all of your devices. So everybody here today has access to accessibility functions, okay? And time management devices. One thing you might not have come across are things like smart pens. And if you've got a student who's taking notes, for example, these can be very useful. So they can record the person speaking while you're writing down whatever notes you want to. It also then transfers it immediately to an iPad or a computer. So it's synced electronically to a device. They're quite inexpensive and very useful for somebody who has a learning disability or maybe doesn't pay attention as much as they should, or who finds taking notes and listening too difficult. Who hasn't done that? The other thing is the reading pen, which I've just talked about, but there's also one such as the scan marker, and the scan marker can also translate. So if I have a student who's doing a course in English, for example, but really speaks Malay or speaks a different language and doesn't know English very fluently, or the other way around, scan marker might help them. So particularly with certain words or phrases, it can help them to access the content where they might not otherwise able to be accessing it. So the graphic organisers, I've got Corgi in here too. But other ones that you come across, there's a number of free ones online as well, such as MindMap and Miro MindMap. So mind mapping or graphic organising software can help somebody who finds it difficult to organise their information. We might have somebody with a processing difficulty, and these help them to understand the content and where it fits. So I'm a big fan of online graphic organisers. The other things that you might come across are the inbuilt supports for all of your devices. So for example, in Microsoft Windows, in Apple, Android and Google, they've got accessibility functions that you can turn on and off. While I don't advise you to do this right now, because you'll get voice reader stuck on, I'd suggest that once we finish today that you go and have a bit of a play around with your own devices. And, you know, iPhones in particular are very, very useful, and you can turn on all sorts of different contrasts. You can have text to speech, you can have speech to text where you're speaking and it's typing out what you're saying. It can actually enhance readability in a variety of ways, including contrast, including text size, and can also help with audio support. So there's a variety of different accessibility features you can access on different devices, but they all have something Okay, so these are just some examples of ones from a Windows system, for example. And I can change the mouse pointer in a variety of different ways. I might go and make it very big. I might have a tail on my mouse so that I can track that more easily when I'm moving it across the screen. I can actually magnify my screen. I can change the contrast. So if I have a vision impairment, I can turn the narrator on, which is very annoying if you do it by mistake. It narrates every single thing on your screen, and then you have to go and find out how to turn it off. Okay. And if you've got a hearing impairment, for example, I might have closed captions put on, and I can change the way the audio functions are delivered. With interaction, I can change my keyboard. I can use sticky keys if I've only got use of one hand. I can use sticky keys, and then if I'm doing Control-Alt-Delete, for example, I don't have to use two hands to do it. So there's a variety of different functions that you can go in and have a look at. I won't go through all of these today because I don't have time, but I would really advise you go and have a play with it. You're not going to hurt the computer or the device. Go in and have a go and changing some of those things, and consider when you do the needs of the students in your classroom. So you've gone and done a bit of a survey, you've looked at some of the needs of students, or you've done it as a group, which is fabulous. Think about those particular needs and what you could use that's already built into their devices to address those needs. Okay. So when I'm using OER, these are things that might need to be activated for that student to access that OER. All right. One of my favorites, and you're going to have a full session on this with Chrome, which is with Google, which is fabulous, are the Chrome apps and extensions. So there are a number of freely available, easily downloadable extensions which sit within the toolbar of your Google site and do a variety of different things. Now, there's a whole accessibility site that you can go and have a look at on Google, which highlights a number of these apps and extensions. So some of the ones that I use, for example, are Dragon. And Dragon Naturally Speaking is a voice-to-text feature, and I actually use it to mark. So when I'm marking, if I'm providing long comments, I use Dragon. Okay, and I find it much easier than sitting there typing. It works better for me. So I actually do use it as a lecturer as well. Okay. Read and write for Google Chrome. If I've got students with dyslexia, it can help them to enhance their reading, but also their writing capabilities as well. It's got things like word prediction that can help them when they're writing assignments. One tab, if I'm, particularly when I'm lecturing, if I've got a number of different websites I want students to visit, I can just compile them into one tab and just give that one link for them. Okay. Things like Purify will take a web page, for example, and remove all the content that's not necessary. So all the ads, all the pictures, it'll just leave the text there for the student to read. So there'll be no distracting information around. What else have I got? Screen, no. So things like a writing prompt generator. If you're in a classroom and you want students to write and just writing is the pure task, then I can actually click a button and it'll generate a writing prompt for me. So there's so many different things. You need to go and have a look and figure out what is required for your particular student cohort or for yourself when you're working in those apps. So lots of exciting things out there. And if I get time, I'll show you how some of them work. Okay. So when we're looking at high-tech devices, this includes things like dedicated speech generating devices. And some of these can be incredibly expensive. If you have students with cerebral palsy, students with significant physical disabilities, they may have access to these types of devices. You've also got that voice recognition software. I've talked about Dragon already, but each of your devices has voice recognition software built into it. Now, I particularly like the Dragon because it is more accurate and I've got experience with it, but every device has that. So if I have a student that finds typing difficult, they can actually speak their assignment. They can go back in later and address, any formatting issues, but they can actually talk it out. So if I have got students who are having those sorts of issues, and I know we had a question to Bill around that sort of aspect, then this is something I would recommend that they would use. Okay. You've got things like screen reader software, very important, particularly for if you can't read very fluently, or if you have a vision impairment. Things like refreshable braille displays, where you've got a braille, I'll show you in a second, I've got a picture, a braille display that reads out the text on a screen. So it changes. And things like new and upcoming technologies such as virtual and augmented reality, eye gaze technology, and 3D printing. So these are some of the areas in which you can really get some strong collaboration with the people with a disability. Okay, this is really critical because they need to be the ones that tell you what's working, what's not working for them, what they would need in order to access the content or the learning in your classroom. So this is an example here of a boy using some eye gaze technology, and he has cerebral palsy. He is actually has a dot right in the middle of his forehead, and it's that dot that the computer screen is looking for. Okay, if he stays on a particular function, it'll click and open that function for him. So with speech generating devices, there's some very expensive ones like a Dynavox. So you'll see the one down the bottom is a Dynavox worth about $10,000 Australian. Okay, so not particularly cheap. But now we can get iPads, and iPads are relatively inexpensive in comparison. And we can get an app called Proloquo to Go or Touch Chat. And though the price of that has been reduced quite significantly. So if I have a student who can't speak for any reason, they can use these speech generating devices. You can also get some that are very small. So I have one here. Oh, can you see that? No, probably not. You're probably not going to be able to see it because I've got the thing on. So you can get some that are just smaller components as well. With voice recognition technology, if you've got somebody who tires really easily, so maybe they've got some fatigue, if you've got somebody with cerebral palsy, often they struggle with fatigue, somebody with a motor impairment in some way, then definitely the Dragon Speaking Naturally software is very, very good. The picture I've got here is Dragon Speaking 10, but we are up to number 15 now. So version 15, fantastic. Okay, very clear, very easy to use, much better than some of the older versions. So if you've tried it before and not found it good, have another go. Okay, you can increase the volume of work quite substantially. My son had a motor impairment that wasn't diagnosed until he was in year 11. He was doing just about to do final exams, and he was allowed to use Dragon, and increased his grade from a 55% to 85% in about 3 months. So the volume of work can be increased quite substantially. Okay. And then you've got things like screen reader software. So screen reader software particularly is being used for students with vision impairment, but also students who find reading very difficult. JAWS is one of the most common ones for students with vision impairment, but you also might come across DAISY. So DAISY Reader is another one that's a screen reader. What we need to be careful of is that when we develop inclusive open ed resources, that what we develop can be read by these particular devices. Okay, so the software that's being used for JAWS, we need to make sure that whatever content we're putting up, JAWS can access it, or DAISY, or whatever that person is using at that particular time. You've got things like VoiceOver as well. So VoiceOver is used on iPads and iPhones, and VoiceOver is basically a screen reader, but it also auditorily describes everything on that screen. So it'll say, you know, what the options are for somebody to press or those sorts of things. It'll give a full audio description. And once you turn it off, it's hard to turn it on, it's hard to turn off. Okay, so with the refreshable braille display, this is what it looks like. And you'll see here, there's a single line of braille. There's basically computer generated nylon pins which go up and down. So as the screen is being read, the person can read across and read each sentence that's coming up on the screen. Absolute game changer for people who use braille, and fantastic device, not cheap. Okay, so if you do have somebody using it, generally they've had some really good support in being able to access one of those. And I just wanted to touch base on virtual and augmented reality because these are useful things to incorporate into iOER as well. They really do fit into the UDL remit of providing a variety of different ways to access content. And you'll see, I don't know if you can see that very clearly, but that's actually a flat drawing. And the bird and the plants are all virtual. So it's very hard to take a screenshot of this from my iPad, but that's what it looks like. So you can actually provide lots of different virtual reality for students, augmented reality. And virtual reality is, when you're wearing the headset and you're fully immersed in what's going on. So there's lots of opportunities to put some of those elements too into our inclusive open ed resources, particularly augmented reality. Okay. If you want to experiment with augmented reality, I advise you going and having a look at Quiver Education. It's free to download and play with, so you can at least get a feel for augmented reality. Okay. So with the eye gaze technology, students who have physical disabilities in particular, eye gaze technology is very useful. It helps them not to become too fatigued, and it can be very useful. I've seen a classroom in the US where there were 10 students all using eye gaze technology, all with cerebral palsy. And they were able to communicate, they were able to interact in classroom lessons, fantastic systems that you see. These have come down in price really substantially. So if you do have a student that does find accessing content very difficult, then an eye gaze system is a consideration for them. Okay. Oh, yep. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to touch base on was 3D printing. And 3D printing in particular is a really useful way to get your whole class involved in determining how people can access the content. So this can be a really collaborative exercise in supporting everybody in that particular cohort. Now, there's lots of different free downloadable resources, or if you're really interested and you're in the tech area, for example, you might go and actually have people designing different things. Mohammed, did you want to comment?
Thank you very much, Dr. Pidot from UNIMED for the short introduction. And we are moving on to Nazri, Dr. Nazri.
Oh, yeah.
Ada ke situ?
Sorry.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We need to mute.
Nazmi, can you please mute yourself?
It's all right, I've just muted him. Okay. Sorry, I didn't know what that was about. So there are a number of things that you can 3D print, and you can get people involved in doing so. So what I've got here is a pen holder for people with poor grasp. So if they're having trouble grasping a pen, they can have that particular device. It reduces fatigue. You can have things like a page reader. So if I've got a student with dyslexia, for example, this actually stops them reading everything around the line and just read what is in the particular line. So these are common tools that we might use. Very simple, very easy, but you can print them quite easily as well. And oh, can you see this? This is my hand, ooh, prosthetic hand. Let me just turn my background off for a second so I can show you. How do I do that? Here we go. Let me just turn my background off. Okay, so this is a prosthetic hand that has been 3D printed, and it opens and closes. So it has all of the tendons in it, put down through, okay? So these are freely available to download online, and you can actually get people quite involved in developing their own tools and their own things that would support them in their learning in the particular classrooms that they're working in. So lots of different assistive technology that you're going to come across. What else have I got? Including things like alternative pens. So this is a pen again. And this one you actually put in and write like that. So it's a different way of writing. Okay, all sorts of different tools that you can get that will support people in their learning in a variety of different ways. When we're designing inclusive open ed resources, we need to be thinking about some of the assistive technologies that can support people as well. And a lot of the times we can incorporate them into our inclusive open educational resources. Oh, let me go. Okay. There's an organisation too that prints models for people who are blind. So if you're working in an area that requires a lot of modelling, for example, it could be the medical area, it may be engineering where you're requiring models for people to feel. There's an organisation that will print them for you. So C3D is a great little place, and you can go and have a look at some of the models they've already printed if you're interested. You can also do things like create tactile maps. So from here, you can download from Google Drive, from Google Maps, and it'll create a map of your local area. If you have a student on campus who needs to navigate around campus, something like this would be very useful in providing them with some supports doing that. Okay, so it's free. It doesn't cost anything. And if you're into 3D printing, these sorts of things can be very useful as well. Okay. Oh, if I've got time. Oh, no, not really. I'm going to do this one. So what I want you to do is to go to Answer Garden. Let me put this in your, let me put it in the chat for you. 1 second. There we go. Okay. So I'd like you to go to Answer Garden, and Answer Garden is a collaborative tool that you can actually use, and there we go. Yep, there we go. That you can use to work in a group of people. You've only got 20 characters, so be brief, but I would like you to maybe put in some ideas about some of the assistive technology you've seen used in your classroom or in your workplace, and provide some answers to the Answer Garden. Okay, so you can just contribute to those. Let me find it. So I'm just going to give you a few minutes to do that. Okay. So let me share the Answer Garden that's coming up. There you go. Oh, Padlet's a very popular one. So you'll see in Answer Garden as well that it'll bring up, make things bigger if they're more sighted. Where is the moon? What's that? I'm intrigued. Who put in where is the moon? Oh. Okay, so I'll just refresh this one last time. The only problem is you have to refresh it. Okay, fantastic. So we've got here a variety of different tools that people have actually seen and used. Absolutely brilliant. So things like read aloud, closed captions, Padlet's obviously a very popular one for collaboration. Hearing aids, Pear Deck's excellent. I love Pear Deck. Wakelet's great. Dragon, Mentimeter. Have to check that out. Edpuzzle's particularly useful and can be great for a variety of different things. Pen tablets, Jamboard is very good. Speech to text, Facebook groups. I'm going to have to find out what where is the moon is, but lots of different things. So people have actually accessed quite a lot of assistive technology. So it's now thinking about how we can incorporate some of that assistive technology into our planning for iOER. Let me do a new share. Okay. So taking us back to our PowerPoint. Thank you, everybody. That was really good. excuse me. I'm going to actually bypass the next section, and I'm going to put it into next week's session. So I want to talk about free and open source software that we can incorporate into iOER, but I'm going to actually move that into the next session because we're running out of time. So let me just get past that and go to open pedagogy. Okay. So when we're looking at inclusive open educational resources, there are certain open pedagogies that we need to be using as well. If we're looking to incorporate and collaborate with students on regards to developing open educational resources, then there are some things that we need to ensure they have access to. So one is the learning structure design. So making sure we have a clear understanding or a clear guideline for students about what we're aiming to achieve within that particular OER. Looking at participation, making sure that everybody can participate, all people can contribute to whatever is happening, that everyone can access the knowledge and learning, and that might mean affordable fees or using open education resources to do so. Knowledge creation is all about giving students agency and licensing things in an open way so that they can be achievable and accessible for everybody. And then sharing knowledge. So how do we connect the learning? How do we connect people together? How do we connect different learning elements together as well? So lots of things to think about when we're looking at open pedagogy. Okay. So open pedagogy is described as a set of principles or practices that include engaging students in the content creation. Okay. So it's not just about us developing that content, but how can we get students involved in developing some of that content too? And sometimes it's known as open pedagogy, sometimes it's known as open educational practice. So you'll see the terms used differently in different texts, for example. So when we're using OER resources, and if we're developing inclusive OER resources just for our use or just to share, then it's really knowing and understanding the concepts of open educational resources and building knowledge using the 5 R's. Okay, so the 5 R's are the ones I showed you at the start of our session today: reuse, remix, redistribute, etc. Okay. If we're looking at OER-enabled pedagogy, then that means that we're really getting students involved in developing some of these open education resources too. And there's a number of different types of pedagogies that you might come across. Some of the ones I just wanted to touch base with are things like collaborative annotation. Interesting. Creating study resources, and it might be that you're getting a group of third-year tertiary students, for example, to create resources for first-year students. So you're getting them to understand the concepts while they're actually creating for someone else. It could be creating visual supports and using infographics and different types of graphics, and creating text themselves. So when we're looking at the OER-enabled pedagogy, there's lots of different tools that we can use to ensure students can do that. When we're looking at collaborative annotation, for example, you might have a particular reading and you want students to annotate elements of that reading, but you want them to do it as an entire group. Hypothesis allows you to do that. So there's a tools already out there that can support you in developing these particular tools. Collaborative annotation is only really considered open pedagogy if they have the option to share their comments publicly. And hypothesis allows them to do that. So they might be critiquing a news article, for example, and they can actually share those comments in a public forum and do so in a collaborative way. Okay. Google Docs is the other one that can help with that too. When they're creating study resources, they might produce resources to help other students learn the content. You know yourselves as educators and working in tertiary institutions that if you have to develop the content, you tend to learn it a bit better yourself. Okay, so you know we should get students to be doing that too. And it could be things like writing questions for a test bank, might be creating videos or developing worksheets, for example. So they can share them through repositories, and it could be university repositories or general repositories like Merlot. So OER Commons, Merlot, there's a variety of repositories out there. We're going to be talking a lot more about them on next Friday. Okay, so we'll go through some of the repositories, how you access data from them as well. OpenStax is another really good one. So that's a repository for sharing with everybody. Okay. When we're looking at visual supports, students might develop infographics, for example, or visual displays of data, and related to a course content, but then shared. So that sharing is the key component of open education resources. It's, can they share them publicly? Are they shared in a public forum? And they can also revise or remix infographics depending on what the licensing is for those infographics. So an example might be something like this. This has a Creative Commons BYNC license, and Cable Green will talk to us about those on Monday, and we'll go through what all of that means. And here you can see this is just a quick guide to open education resources, a lovely little visual, but you can actually go in and use this in a variety of different ways. Okay, so sharing, not a problem. As you'll note, that you always have to have an attribution. So you would always attribute the person who originally designed those resources or the person who remixed or reused it. Okay. So when we're creating OER text, you can actually get students to create a textbook for your course. And this is something I have very seriously considered. There's a couple of courses that I run where there is no appropriate textbook for that course. So you might co-create a particular text. You might publicly share and openly license that text. And there's actually a really great guide to making open textbooks there, and I've given you the link for that. So if you're interested, go and have a look at what the process might be in regards to how do we create an open textbook. And then I've got an example, a revised open textbook. So somebody has provided an open source text, and a gentleman and his entire student cohort have gone in and revised that text and then made it publicly available. Okay, so when we're looking at open ed resources, that publicly available component, something to really remember there as well. Where am I going? Oh, I've lost my, there we go. Okay, so we have come towards the end of our time, but I do want to give you a few minutes to just touch base with your facilitators. So just note, you know, if you are having problems with the first task, please let them know, and they are there to help you. They're fabulous facilitators like I've never seen before. And of course, for the next task, I want you to actually, if you can, and if you have students available to you, try one of those OER enabled pedagogies. It doesn't have to be complex. I'm not expecting you to devise a textbook, but can you get them to revise maybe an infographic or, you know, something like that? So make it simple, but if you have a cohort that you can work with, I want you to try one of them very briefly, and then just record your reflections. Did it work? Did it not work? What would you need to consider for future? Okay. If you don't have a student cohort that you can currently work with, and I know quite a few don't, then I want you to examine your workplace setting. So where you're currently working, and that might be at home, if you're at home because of COVID, it could be at the university, whatever. And I want you to identify the barriers that students might experience if they had disabilities in that particular workplace. From there, I want you to think about some of the assistive technology, whether it's low tech or high tech, and we're in between, that might be beneficial to address those barriers. So really getting you to think about what barriers are around, and it could be the tasks you're expected to do in your workplace. It could be the actual environment itself. But this helps you to then get into that mindset of, if I've got a barrier in my learning, what can I then do to address it? Okay, so there's method in my madness. What I would like to do now is to actually put you into some breakout rooms just for 5 minutes to talk with your facilitators. Now, does everybody know what group they should be in? If not, it's up on our Google Drive. Do you want to put them in the chat again, Mr. Dr. Chong?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you. And Dr. Chong will very kindly put them in our chat with the universities against the groups that you're expected to go into. So I'll create 10 breakout groups. If you can please choose your appropriate group. The Simeo people, you're in group 10. Okay. And from there, just have a brief discussion about what's expected. I would expect you to be able to do this probably by Wednesday of next week. So that's, if you need more time, please let me know. But it's not meant to be an onerous task. It's just meant to be something you're thinking about and considering. Okay. So I'm going to put you into breakout rooms now. Maybe. Yes, I am. Okay. And you can actually choose your room that is relevant to your particular facilitator. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes and then we'll come back. Okay.
Dr. Diane, I share the grouping info in the main WhatsApp groups.
Perfect.
So they can retrieve their grouping.
All right, so it looks like we're pretty much back. Excellent. So I'd like, go on.
Oh yeah, so I would like to ask you one question. So
Sure.
Towards the end of the this course, we are required to develop some application tools, or we just design our learning activities, support with identifying some of the technologies to support our learning activities?
Yes, so you're actually going to devise some open education resources for your particular learning area, or maybe your workplace or something like that. So what field are you in at the moment?
Pardon me?
What field are you teaching in or working in?
Oh, I'm working on multimedia application.
Marketing?
ICT.
Oh, ICT. Okay, great. So you can develop some open education resources, maybe on a particular ICT, and make sure that it's going to be able to be accessed by everybody. So you're going to make sure it's an inclusive thing. So if you've got PDF documents, for example, are they inclusive? Are they accessible? If you've got PowerPoints, are they accessible? If you're using Google Slides, there's an accessibility checker for that. So we're going to be looking at that next week in quite a lot of depth. And it's all about making sure that if you do have those open educational resources, that they can be accessible by as many people as possible.
Okay, so we're going to be use one platform to develop it, and then I think through the courses, they will introduce us with some of the tools to develop.
Yep, absolutely. So you really don't need any additional tools than what you've already got. And we're going to go and have a look at more depth at what open education resources look like next week. So I'll show you some online and take you through what they look like, how they're structured, those sorts of things. So you'll get a good idea of that. I won't just throw you in, don't worry.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. So welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you've got a good understanding of what your next task is. And next week, we're going to be, like I said, going into much more depth in regards to how do we make things inclusive, and what does an open education resource look like, and then what does an inclusive open education resource look like. So we're going to be building up your skills and understanding as we work through these 2 weeks to hopefully then eventually get you to develop some open education resources which can go into a central repository that everyone can access. Okay, and if you're working not in a teaching environment, then there's always a way. So it could be that you're going to make an open education resource about a process that must be followed in human resources or something like that. So we can always find something for you to target, so don't worry there. Okay, are there any additional questions before we call it a day?
Dr. Diane?
Yes.
I have a question. Now I'm teaching actually one of these particular courses, which they call it graphic design.
Oh, yeah.
So basically, I'm interested looking at, I only have around 67 students in the class. So I thought that I'm planning of looking at, the color blindness, because, when they're dealing with graphic design, color blindness can be, something quite interesting to look at.
Yes.
And the things that I just started actually creating Mentimeter and also giving them a colorblind test at this moment. So I'm not sure how many % actually they will be colorblind. So
it's interesting. If you look at the statistics, it's something like 9%.
Yeah,
maybe
and
less.
usually it's more male, isn't it?
Yes, more male, but males tend to go yellow-green colorblind, red-green colorblind. But there's also a blue-yellow colorblind too.
All right, so I'll try to give a test first today, and let them test the colorblind first through the online test.
Yeah.
And I'll see what I can do in my class next Thursday. Actually, unfortunately, my class just started on next Thursday.
Yeah, that's okay. Just look, do what you can. Don't be too worried if it's, but what you might do is say, okay, let's do this test. And then what would we do if somebody is colorblind? How would we make sure we design our graphics so that everybody can recognize them?
Yeah. All right. Okay, thanks.
All right. Well done. I'm excited. Sorry, go.
Diane, yeah, I have questions that I'm helping my group members. Like here we have to do with one class group, but can we just choose one student, and our student now is at home, so we only choose only one student and we do the session with only one student, not necessarily a whole class group. Is it possible we do that?
It's not very collaborative if you're only using one student. So if you're designing these resources and using OER enabled pedagogy, you really need to do it as a class group or with a few students. So it maybe 5 students would be better if you find that you can't. So it's that collaborative aspect that really comes in here as well. And it's all about everybody contributing to the design of resources.
Okay.
So it would be preferable to have more than, we can't really do it with one student, sorry.
Okay.
Dr. Fong, would you like to close up for the day?
Yes. So Dr. Diane Chambers, thank you very, very much for a very enlightening session for all of us. And to many of us, I believe it's it is a journey into an unknown world. So we are very open to it. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for bringing in BU, okay?
Yes.
And we look forward to next week when you bring in also our cable green.
Absolutely.
Now, it's so important for us to say a very, very big thank you to all our facilitators that is headed by Dr. Chong. Terima kasih banyak-banyak. Okay. The facilitators have been so patient and so kind and so accommodating. Marvelous. And to all of us, it is so very important that we participate actively in all the assignment so as to gain the most out of the activities. Okay, I think we look forward for next week. Dr. Diane Chamber, thank you so much. Terima kasih.
You're very welcome. Thank you. And if the facilitators could hang back, I'll have a chat with you all. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.